You've probably heard of the Gilded Age, right? An era of robber barons and industrial titans. But what if I told you there was one man who didn't just play the game? He basically designed the entire board. That man was J.P. Morgan, the true architect of modern American finance. So let's get into it, this larger-than-life figure who at times literally held the entire U.S. economy in the palm of his hand.
To really get a sense of his influence, this quote from his biographer says it all. Not the most powerful banker, not the richest industrialist, but the most powerful private citizen. Just think about that for a second. This wasn't just a guy with a lot of money. This was a man whose personal power could rival and sometimes even overshadow the United States government itself.
And this really gets to the heart of his story. Was he a savior or a monopolist? A hero or a villain? I mean, look at the arguments. On one hand, he bailed out the U.S. Treasury and single-handedly stopped the Panic of 1907. On the other, he built massive trusts that absolutely crushed any competition and held a terrifying amount of unchecked power. This constant contradiction is really the key to understanding the man. Okay, so let's start with the man himself, the Colossus of Wall Street. This is where you really see how one man's personal ambition ended up becoming the blueprint for the entire nation's economy. We're talking about a figure who stood head and shoulders above even guys like Rockefeller and Carnegie.
Here's a little snapshot of the man behind the money. He was this big, imposing figure. But the numbers are just staggering. Get this, he controlled assets that were worth more than the entire U.S. federal budget. He was on the board of dozens of the most important companies in America. And somehow this same titan of industry was also a deeply religious man and one of the most obsessive art collectors in history. Talk about a walking contradiction.
So, how did he get all this power? Well, that brings us to his signature move, his secret sauce. It was a process so unique to him, they actually gave it his name, the art of Morganization. This was his method for taking the wild, chaotic industries of the time and hammering them into streamlined, stable, and unbelievably profitable empires. So what exactly was Morganization? Well, think of it like a formula. He'd find an industry that was a total mess, force all the competitors to merge into one giant company, restructure all their debt, and then he'd put his own hand-picked people in charge to run the whole thing. It was all about replacing chaos with control. His control.
Here's the playbook, broken down. Step 1. Find an industry in total chaos, like railroads that were constantly trying to bankrupt each other. Step 2. Force them all to consolidate. Step 3. Clean up the messy finances. And Step 4, the killer move, install your own loyal team to make sure it never gets messy again. It was simple, totally ruthless, and it worked like a charm.
And wow, did it get results. Just look at this. In 1885, he fixed the railroads. In 1891, he literally created General Electric by merging Thomas Edison's company with another. And then the big one, the absolute pinnacle. In 1901, he buys out Andrew Carnegie to create U.S. Steel, the world's very first billion-dollar corporation. These weren't just companies. These were the cornerstones of the 20th century American economy.
But Morgan's influence wasn't just in the boardroom. Oh no. It got to the point where he became America's unofficial one-man central bank. You got to remember, this was before the Federal Reserve. So when the country's entire financial system was about to collapse, there was basically only one person you could call.
The first huge test came in 1895. The U.S. Treasury was flat out running out of gold. And this wasn't just some accounting issue. If the government's gold ran out, the U.S. dollar would become worthless overnight. We're talking about a potential global economic meltdown.
So what did Morgan do? He basically stepped in and did the government's job. He teamed up with the powerful Rothschild family in Europe, organized a massive sale of U.S. bonds, and physically shipped millions of dollars worth of gold back to the States to refill the Treasury. He saved the dollar, for sure, but it created this huge public backlash. People were furious that one private banker had that kind of power over the fate of the nation.
But that was just a warm-up act. The main event was the Panic of 1907. As you can see from this timeline, things went from bad to worse fast. When the whole system just seized up, Morgan, who was 70 years old at this point, took complete command. He famously locked the nation's top bankers in his personal library and basically told them nobody was leaving until they agreed to fund a bailout. Incredible. $240 million. That is the amount of money Morgan personally organized to stop the crisis. That was an almost unbelievable amount of capital for one person to command, and it was just enough to pull the American financial system back from the brink of total disaster.
But this whole event was a huge wake-up call for the country. It proved that you couldn't just count on one aging banker to save the day every time a crisis hit. The Panic of 1907 is what directly led Congress to create the Federal Reserve System in 1913. They built an official institution to do the job so that no single individual would ever have that much power again.
So, what is J.P. Morgan's legacy today?
Well, let's look at how his empire transformed after he was gone, and how his influence is still felt in the massive global firm that still carries his name. Near the end of his life, Morgan got hauled before Congress to answer for his immense power. A congressman asked him what the basis of commercial credit really was. Morgan didn't say money or property or collateral. He said character. That one word tells you everything about his worldview. He believed that finance was all built on trust and stability, and that it all came down to the integrity of the men in charge. Men, of course, like him.
After he died in 1913, his empire had to change. New laws, like the Glass-Steagall Act, came in and broke up his massive House of Morgan. But over the course of the next century, through all kinds of mergers and deals, the pieces slowly started coming back together, eventually forming the modern giant we all know today, J.P. Morgan Chase.
And if you really want your mind blown, just look at this comparison. Morgan's personal fortune, which was absolutely massive for his time, was about $1.9 billion in today's money. The company he founded now controls over $4 trillion in assets. It is a financial empire on a scale that even J.P. Morgan himself could probably have never imagined.
So, we'll leave you with this question to think about. Morgan was a product of his time, an age with no safety nets, where one man's sheer force of will could actually stop a panic. Today, we're facing all new kinds of financial threats in a complex digital world. So it really makes you wonder, does the world need another figure with the power and decisiveness of a J.P. Morgan? Or is the system he inadvertently helped create strong enough to save us this time?